The excitement of my first day at college was palpable as I lugged my overstuffed suitcase up the stairs of Willow Hall. The old brick building loomed before me, its ivy-covered walls holding the promise of new beginnings. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of freshly cut grass and possibility. Room 237. I fumbled with my key, my hands shaking slightly as I unlocked the door to my new home for the next year. The room was small but cozy, with 2 beds, desks, and dressers crammed into the space. Sunlight streamed through the large window, illuminating the dust particles floating in the air. One side of the room was already occupied. A neatly made bed with a plain gray comforter, a stack of textbooks on the desk, and a small plant on the windowsill were the only signs of my mysterious roommate. I dropped my suitcase on the empty bed and began to unpack, wondering when I'd meet the person I'd be sharing this tiny space with. Hours passed, and there was still no sign of my roommate. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I decided to head to the dining hall for dinner. I scribbled a quick note introducing myself and left it on her desk, hoping to break the ice. When I returned, the room was exactly as I'd left it. The note remained untouched. I shrugged it off, figuring she must be busy with orientation activities or hanging out with friends. I settled into bed, the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the old building keeping me awake long into the night. A soft shuffling sound jolted me from my restless sleep. The digital clock on my desk glowed 3:17 a.m. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. There was again a quiet rustling, like someone moving around the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned my head towards my roommate's side of the room. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, I could make out a figure sitting at the desk. Relief washed over me. It was just my roommate, probably studying late. I cleared my throat softly, not wanting to startle her. "Hi," I whispered. "I'm Emma. Sorry if I woke you earlier." No response. The figure remained motionless, hunched over the desk. I frowned, a tendril of unease curling in my stomach. "Hello." I tried again, a little louder this time. The figure's head snapped up, turning towards me with an unnaturally quick movement. I caught a glimpse of pale skin and dark, hollow eyes before the room plunged into darkness. I blinked rapidly, my eyes struggling to adjust. When I could see again, the desk chair was empty. I barely slept that night, convincing myself it was just a dream brought on by new surroundings and first-day jitters. The next morning, I rushed to my first class without seeing any sign of my roommate. Throughout the day, I pushed the unsettling experience to the back of my mind, throwing myself into the excitement of college life. As the days passed, a strange routine developed. I never saw my roommate during daylight hours. Her side of the room remained immaculate, never changing except for the occasional appearance of a new book or the plant being watered. I began to wonder if I was sharing a room with a ghost or if the housing office had made a mistake. I tried leaving more notes, but they always went unanswered. I asked my RA about my roommate, but she just shrugged and said some people prefer to keep to themselves. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was during my second week that things took a turn for the bizarre. I woke up one morning to find my favorite sweater missing from the closet. I searched everywhere, thinking I must have misplaced it in my still unpacked boxes. It was nowhere to be found. A few days later, my laptop charger vanished. Then a textbook. Each time, I convinced myself I was just being forgetful, adjusting to a new environment and schedule. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that something more sinister was at play. The nighttime disturbances grew more frequent. I'd wake to the sound of typing, the click-clack of keys echoing in the darkness. But whenever I turned to look, the room was still and silent. Sometimes, I'd feel a presence looming over my bed, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I'd squeeze my eyes shut, too terrified to open them and see what might be standing there. My grades began to suffer as lack of sleep took its toll. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and I jumped at every shadow. My new friends commented on how pale and drawn I looked, but I brushed off their concerns. How could I explain that I was being haunted by a roommate I'd never met? It all came to a head one night in October. A fierce storm raged outside, rain lashing against the window and thunder shaking the old building to its foundations. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep with the noise and the oppressive feeling of dread that had become my constant companion. A particularly loud crack of thunder startled me fully awake. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something on my roommate's bed. My breath caught in my throat. There, neatly laid out, were all of my missing items. My sweater, my charger, my textbook, and dozens of other small things I hadn't even realized were gone. I sat up slowly, my whole body trembling. That's when I saw her. She stood in the corner of the room, a pale, gaunt figure in a tattered gray dress. Her long, dark hair hung in limp strands around her face, obscuring her features. But I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting. My voice shook as I forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, an eerily inhuman movement. When it spoke, the voice was a dry whisper, like dead leaves scraping across pavement. "I am your roommate." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. No, you're not real. This isn't happening." A sound emanated from the figure, a terrible rasping noise that I realized was laughter. "I am as real as you are, Emma. I've always been here, watching, waiting for what?" I managed to choke out. The figure glided towards me, its movements fluid and unnatural. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. It stopped at the foot of my bed, looming over me. "For you?" it whispered. For a friend, a cold, clammy hand reached out towards me. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat and echoing off the walls. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for the door handle. As I wrenched the door open, I risked one last glance back. The room was empty. No figure in the corner. No neatly arranged pile of my belongings on the other bed. Just 2 desks, 2 dressers, and my rumpled sheets. I ran down the hallway in my pajamas, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor. I didn't stop until I reached the RA's room, pounding on the door until a bleary-eyed senior opened it. Through gasping sobs, I tried to explain what had happened. The RA listened patiently, then gently explained that I didn't have a roommate. Room 237 was a single occupancy this semester due to an odd number of students in the dorm. I'd been living alone the entire time. My mind reeled, unable to process this information. How could that be possible? What about the books, the plant, the neatly made bed? As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the windows, the RA accompanied me back to my room. Everything was exactly as I'd left it when I moved in. 1 bed, 1 desk, 1 dresser. No sign that anyone else had ever lived there. I moved out that day, unable to spend another night in that room. The university was understanding, allowing me to transfer to a different dorm with a real flesh and blood roommate. I never went back to Willow Hall. Years have passed, and I've almost convinced myself it was all a stress-induced hallucination. Almost. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that dry, rasping whisper in my ear. "I'm still here, Emma. Still watching. Still waiting. Won't you come be my roommate again?" And I pull the covers over my head, squeezing my eyes shut against the darkness, wondering if I'll ever truly be free of room 237 and the silent roommate who never was. The day I realized I was being stalked was the day the library became my prison. It started innocently enough. As a junior majoring in English literature, I practically lived in the university's vast library. The towering shelves, the musty smell of old books, and the hushed atmosphere had always been my sanctuary. But over the past few weeks, that sanctuary had slowly morphed into something sinister. I'd noticed him for the first time about a month ago. Tall, with shaggy brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses, He looked like any other student. What caught my attention was how he always seemed to be there, no matter where I chose to study. At first, I brushed it off as coincidence. It was midterm season after all. The library was crowded with stressed-out students cramming for exams. But as the days went by, the prickle of unease at the back of my neck grew stronger. Today, I decided to test my theory. Instead of my usual spot in the literature section, I deliberately chose a table in the far corner of the science wing, an area I rarely visited. I settled in, spreading out my books and notes, and began to work on my essay on Victorian poetry. An hour passed, and I began to relax. Maybe I had been paranoid after all. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar figure slide into a seat 2 tables away. My heart sank as I recognized the shaggy brown hair and glasses. I forced myself to focus on my work, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. My skin crawled and the words on the page in front of me blurred. After another excruciating hour, I packed up my things and left, my hands shaking as I shoved books into my bag. As I hurried down the library steps, the cool autumn air hit my face, and I took a deep breath. I was being silly. He probably just had a similar study schedule to mine. There was no reason to. "Excuse me," a voice called out behind me. "You dropped this." I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Slowly, I turned around. He stood there, holding out a small notebook, my journal, which I always kept with me. It must have fallen out of my bag in my haste to leave. "Thanks," I stammered, quickly snatching it from his hand. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No problem. See you around, Sarah." As he walked away, my mind reeled. I had never told him my name. That night, I tossed and turned in my dorm room, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. My roommate, Jen, noticed my distraction. "You okay, Sarah? You seem out of it." I considered telling her about the strange encounters in the library, but decided against it. It sounded crazy even in my own head. "Just stress about midterms," I lied, forcing a smile. The next morning, I steeled myself and headed back to the library. I had too much work to do to let one creepy guy keep me away. I chose a table in plain sight, near the circulation desk where the librarians could see me. As I pulled out my laptop, a small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. Frowning, I picked it up. My blood ran cold as I read the neatly printed message. "You look beautiful when you sleep, Sarah." My hands trembling, I crumpled the note and shoved it into my pocket. I glanced around wildly, but there was no sign of him. How had he gotten into my bag? When had he been in my room? I couldn't focus on my work. Every small noise made me jump, and I felt exposed, vulnerable. After an hour of staring blankly at my computer screen, I gave up and packed my things. As I walked across campus, hugging my bag close to my body, I felt eyes on me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The familiar path to my dorm seemed endless, shadows lurking behind every tree and bush. I burst into my room, slamming the door behind me and leaning against it, breathing heavily. Jen looked up from her desk, startled. "Sarah, what's wrong?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, I burst into tears. Through my sobs, I finally told Jen everything. The constant presence in the library, the note, the growing fear that had become my constant companion. She listened, her eyes widening with concern. "We need to report this," she said firmly. "This is serious, Sarah. He's stalking you." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "You're right. I'll go to campus security tomorrow." But when I woke up the next morning, I found my laptop open on my desk. I was sure I'd closed it the night before. With a growing sense of dread, I approached it. On the screen was a document I didn't recognize. As I read the words, my blood turned to ice. "I know you're planning to tell them about me, Sarah. That would be a big mistake. Remember, I'm always watching. Always." I slammed the laptop shut, my breath coming in short gasps. How had he gotten in? How did he know? I skipped my classes that day, too terrified to leave my room. Jen brought me food and tried to convince me to go to the police, but I was paralyzed with fear. What if he was out there waiting? As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me in the library. Midnight. Come alone, or everyone will know your secret. My secret. The thing I'd never told anyone, not even Jen. The shameful incident from high school that I'd tried so hard to forget. How could he possibly know? I knew I shouldn't go. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in my room, to call the police, to do anything but meet this stalker. But the fear of my secret getting out overrode everything else. At 11:55 p.m., I slipped out of my dorm, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The campus was eerily quiet. The only sound the rustling of leaves in the cool night breeze. The library loomed before me, dark and imposing. I tried the door, surprised to find it unlocked. Stepping inside, I was enveloped in darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "I'm here. What do you want?" Silence. I moved deeper into the library, the beam of my phone's flashlight casting strange, shifting shadows among the bookshelves. Every creak of the old building made me jump. As I rounded a corner, I saw a figure standing at the end of the aisle. My breath caught in my throat. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Please, just leave me alone." The figure stepped forward, and I stumbled back, my phone clattering to the floor. The flashlight beam swept across the figure's face, and I gasped. It wasn't him. Instead, I found myself staring into the stern face of Mrs. Holloway, the head librarian. "Sarah Thompson," she said, her voice sharp in the darkness. "I'm very disappointed in you." I blinked, confusion replacing fear. "Mrs. Holloway? I don't understand. What's going on?" She sighed, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small book. My stomach dropped as I recognized my journal. "You dropped this last week," she said. "I was going to return it to you, but then I made the mistake of opening it." Imagine my shock when I read about how you've been stealing rare books from the special collections and selling them online. My secret, the shame I'd carried for so long. In high school, desperate for money to help my struggling family, I'd stolen valuable books from the school library and sold them. I'd never been caught, but the guilt had eaten at me ever since. I can explain," I stammered, but Mrs. Holloway held up a hand. "Save it," she said. "I've already contacted the police. They're on their way." As if on cue, I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. But the notes? The texts? Someone's been stalking me. I protested. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened slightly. "There was no stalker, Sarah. It was me. I needed to scare you into meeting me here, where the evidence of your theft is stored. I couldn't risk you destroying it if you knew I was on to you." As the reality of the situation crashed down on me, I sank to the floor, my legs no longer able to support me. The stalker, the fear, the sleepless nights, all of it had been a carefully orchestrated plan to expose my past crimes. The library doors burst open, fluorescent lights flickering to life as police officers poured in. As they approached, reading me my rights, I realized that my sanctuary had indeed become my prison, but not in the way I had feared. The greatest threat hadn't been a mysterious stalker, but the secrets I'd tried so hard to keep hidden. As the officers led me away, I took one last look at the towering bookshelves that had once been my refuge. Now they stood as silent witnesses to my downfall, their spines containing countless stories, including, finally, the truth of my own. My name's Alex, and I was thrilled to start my freshman year at Blackwood University. The sprawling campus with its Gothic architecture and lush green quads was everything I'd imagined college would be. But Nothing could have prepared me for room 302 in Hawthorne Hall. Move-in day was chaos. A sea of nervous freshmen and teary-eyed parents lugging boxes and suitcases up narrow staircases. I arrived early, eager to settle in and meet my roommate. The heavy wooden door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a small but cozy room with 2 beds, desks, and dressers. I chose the bed by the window, dropping my bags on the faded blue comforter. Sunlight streamed through the warped glass, catching dust motes in its beam. The room had character, with its high ceilings and original hardwood floors. I ran my hand along the old radiator, feeling the history in its chipped paint. My roommate, Tyler, arrived an hour later in a whirlwind of energy and boxes. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of obscure indie bands and horror movies. As we unpacked and decorated, the room slowly transformed into our new home. That first night, exhausted from the day's activities, I fell into a deep sleep. Sometime in the early hours, I woke with a start. The room was pitch black, but I could have sworn I heard someone whispering. I strained my ears, but the sound had stopped. Blaming it on new surroundings and an overactive imagination, I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next day passed in a blur of orientation activities and getting to know you games. By the time Tyler and I stumbled back to our room that evening, we were both ready to crash. As I drifted off, I heard it again, a faint whisper just on the edge of hearing. I sat up, fully awake now. Tyler, I whispered, "Did you say something?" A muffled grunt was the only response from the other bed. I shook my head, trying to clear the cobwebs of sleep. The whispers had stopped, but an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. Something felt off about the room. The third night is when things got weird. I woke up around 3 a.m., the witching hour, to find the room bathed in an eerie blue glow. At first, I thought it was moonlight, but when I looked at the window, the curtains were drawn. The light seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then I heard the whispers again, louder this time. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent pleading. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Tyler," I hissed. "Tyler, wake up." No response. I looked over at his bed and felt my blood run cold. It was empty, the covers thrown back as if he'd left in a hurry. The whispers grew louder, and suddenly I could understand them. "Help us," they said. "Find the truth." I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for the light switch. As soon as my feet hit the floor, the temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath misting in front of me. The light switch did nothing. The bulb remained stubbornly dark. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The whispers stopped abruptly, and for a moment, the only sound was my ragged breathing. Then, slowly, words began to appear on the mirror above my dresser, as if an invisible hand was writing them. 1962. Accident. Cover up. Dig deeper. I blinked, and the room was back to normal. The eerie blue glow was gone, replaced by the faint light of dawn peeking through the curtains. Tyler's bed was occupied again, his snores filling the room. The mirror was clean, no trace of the mysterious message. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, questioning my sanity. Had it all been a vivid nightmare? But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words burned into my mind. 1962. Accident. Cover up. That evening, while Tyler was at soccer practice, I decided to do some digging. The university's online archives were extensive, and it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. In 1962, there had been a tragic accident in Hawthorne Hall. A fire had broken out in the middle of the night, claiming the lives of 3 students. The official report blamed faulty wiring, but there were whispers of foul play and a hasty cover-up. As I read the names of the victims, a chill ran down my spine. One of them had lived in room 302. Over the next few weeks, the strange occurrences in our room escalated. Objects would move on their own. Doors would slam shut without warning, and the temperature would drop randomly, even on the warmest days. Tyler noticed it too, though he tried to laugh it off. Maybe we've got a friendly ghost, he joked one night after we'd both watched a book fly off the shelf. But I knew it wasn't friendly. The whispers continued, growing more insistent each night. The apparition started soon after. Fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures in the corner of my eye, gone when I turned to look. I'd wake up to find scratches on the walls, always in sets of 3. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth about the 1962 fire. I spent hours in the library, poring over old newspapers and yearbooks. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The 3 students who died, Michael, Sarah, and David, had been friends, known for their activism on campus. They'd been investigating rumors of corruption in the university administration just before their deaths. As I dug deeper, I started to receive warnings. Anonymous notes slipped under our door, telling me to stop asking questions. My laptop mysteriously crashed, erasing weeks of research. Even some of my professors seemed on edge, changing the subject quickly whenever I brought up the history of Hawthorne Hall. But the spirits, I was certain now that's what they were, wouldn't let me give up. They became more active, more desperate in their attempts to communicate. One night, I woke to find my research notes rearranged on my desk, key phrases circled and connected with lines. It was like they were trying to show me something, a pattern I hadn't seen before. Tyler was freaked out but supportive. Maybe we should tell someone, he suggested one night, after a particularly violent, ghostly outburst had left our room in shambles. I shook my head. Who would believe us? And besides, I think they need our help. The breakthrough came on a stormy night in late October. The power in Hawthorne Hall had gone out, leaving Tyler and me huddled in our room, flashlights in hand. As thunder rattled the windows, the temperature dropped suddenly, and that now familiar blue glow filled the room. This time, the apparitions didn't hide. 3 figures materialized in front of us. 2 young men and a woman, their forms translucent and flickering like old film. They looked scared, desperate. "Help us," the woman, Sarah, I realized, pleaded. "Tell our story." Michael stepped forward, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "We found proof. The dean, he was embezzling. Millions. We were going to expose him." "The fire wasn't an accident," David added, his form flickering intensely. "He trapped us here, covered it up. Our bodies are still in the building," I finished, the pieces finally clicking into place. "That's why you can't move on." They nodded, their forms already starting to fade. "Find the proof," Sarah whispered. "In the walls. Set us free." With a final flicker, they vanished, leaving Tyler and me in stunned silence. The next few days were a whirlwind. Armed with the spirit's clues, we tore apart our room, looking for hidden compartments or loose floorboards. We found nothing until, in a moment of inspiration, I remembered Sarah's last words. In the walls, carefully, we pried off a section of baseboard. There, in a space that hadn't seen light in over 60 years, was a dusty manila envelope. Inside were documents, financial records, photographs, a confession letter, all proving the dean's crimes and his role in the students' deaths. We took the evidence straight to the police. The story exploded, making national headlines. The current administration, horrified by the cover-up, ordered a complete excavation of Hawthorne Hall. In a hidden sub-basement, they found the remains of Michael, Sarah, and David, finally laying them to rest after all these years. The night after the funeral, Tyler and I returned to our room, unsure of what to expect. The air felt different, lighter somehow. As we got ready for bed, I noticed something on the mirror. In the same ghostly handwriting as before, 3 simple words were written. "Thank you. Goodbye." We never experienced another supernatural event in room 302. The whispers stopped, the temperature remained constant, and our belongings stayed firmly in place. But sometimes on quiet nights, I could swear I felt a presence. Not threatening or scary, but peaceful, grateful. Blackwood University has changed since that Halloween. There's a memorial now, in the quad in front of Hawthorne Hall, honoring Michael, Sarah, and David. Their story is taught in freshman orientation, a reminder of the power of truth and the importance of justice. As for me, well, I changed my major to investigative journalism. After all, there are more stories out there waiting to be told, more truths hiding in the shadows. And thanks to 3 persistent spirits and 1 very haunted dorm room, I now know the importance of listening to the whispers in the dark. The day Professor Emerson vanished was the day our lives changed forever. None of us realized it then, but his disappearance would unravel a web of secrets that would shake our university to its core. I'm Maya Chun, a junior majoring in biochemistry at Westfield University. Professor Emerson's advanced genetics course was the highlight of my week. His lectures were captivating, his enthusiasm infectious. He had a way of making the most complex concepts accessible, peppered with terrible science puns that never failed to make us groan and laugh. That's why his absence that Monday morning felt so wrong. Professor Emerson was never late, let alone absent without notice. We sat in the lecture hall, murmuring amongst ourselves as the minutes ticked by. Finally, Dar Hartley, the department head, entered the room. Her face was drawn, her usual crisp demeanor ruffled. I regret to inform you that Professor Emerson is on an unexpected leave of absence, she announced, her voice tight. The course will be covered by various faculty members until further notice. A ripple of surprise ran through the class. Questions burst forth, but Dr. Hartley shut them down with a curt, "That's all the information I have at this time." As we filed out of the lecture hall, my friend Zach caught up with me. "Something's not right," he muttered, running a hand through his curly hair. "Emerson would never just take off like that, especially not in the middle of the semester." I nodded, a knot forming in my stomach. "I know. Did you see how freaked out Hartley looked?" Over the next few days, rumors flew. Some said Emerson had a nervous breakdown. Others whispered about a family emergency. A few even joked that he'd been abducted by aliens interested in his genetics research. But as days turned into weeks with no word from Professor Emerson, the jokes faded. Concern grew. It wasn't like him to abandon his students or his work. Zach and I decided to do some digging. We started with Emerson's teaching assistant, a grad student named Alicia. She was visibly stressed when we approached her after class. "I'm as in the dark as you are," she said, nervously adjusting her glasses. "All his projects are on hold. They won't even let me into his lab." That last bit caught our attention. Why would they lock down his lab if he was just on leave? Our next stop was Professor Emerson's office. The door was locked, but a peek through the window revealed something odd. The room looked untouched. Papers were still strewn across the desk. A half-empty coffee mug perched precariously on a stack of books. It was as if he'd just stepped out for a moment, not disappeared for weeks. "This is weird, right?" I whispered to Zach. If he'd taken a leave, wouldn't he have cleaned up first? Zach nodded, his brow furrowed. "It's like he vanished into thin air. We were so absorbed in our observations that we didn't hear the footsteps approaching until a sharp voice made us jump. 'Can I help you too?' We spun around to find Dr. Hartley glaring at us, her arms crossed. "We were just, looking for Professor Emerson's office hours," I stammered. Her eyes narrowed. "Professor Emerson is on leave. All his classes and appointments have been reassigned. I suggest you direct any questions to your current instructors." As she shooed us away, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. That night, Zach and I met up in my dorm room to compare notes. We spread out everything we knew about Emerson's disappearance on my bed, trying to find connections. "Okay, what do we actually know?" Zach asked, tapping his pen against his notebook. I counted off on my fingers. 1. Emerson disappeared suddenly without warning. 2. His office looks like he never left. 3. His lab is locked down. 4. The department is being super secretive about the whole thing. Zach nodded, scribbling furiously. And 5, it all happened right after he started that new research project. I blinked. Wait, what new project? Remember that day he came in all excited, talking about a breakthrough? Zach reminded me. It was like a week before he vanished. The memory clicked into place. Emerson had been practically bouncing with excitement, hinting at a major discovery that could change everything we know about genetic engineering. He'd been vague on the details, but promised to tell us more soon. That has to be connected, I said, feeling a surge of excitement. We were on to something. Over the next few days, we dug deeper. We combed through old class notes, searching for clues about Emerson's research. We hung around the biology department, eavesdropping on faculty conversations. We even tried to sweet-talk the janitorial staff into letting us into Emerson's lab, but no luck. Our break came from an unexpected source. I was grabbing coffee at the campus cafe when I overheard 2 grad students talking in hushed tones. Can't believe they're just going to bury it, one was saying. Emerson's work could revolutionize the field. You know why, the other replied grimly. If word got out about what he discovered, it would be a PR nightmare for the university, not to mention the ethical implications. My heart raced as I pretended to be very interested in the creamer options. What had Emerson discovered that was so controversial? I relayed the conversation to Zach, and we knew we had to step up our investigation. That night, we did something I never thought I'd do. We broke into the biology building. Zach had borrowed his roommate's student ID, which had higher security clearance due to his work-study job. We waited until the cleaning crew had gone through, then slipped inside. Emerson's lab was on the 3rd floor. Our footsteps echoed in the empty hallways, every shadow making us jump. When we reached the door, I held my breath as Zach swiped the card. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the lock disengaged. The lab was dark and eerily quiet as we entered. I fumbled for the light switch and fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, revealing a space frozen in time. Half-finished experiments sat on lab benches, notes scribbled on white boards, a screensaver bouncing around on a computer monitor. Look for anything related to his last project, I whispered, though there was no one around to hear us. We split up, rifling through papers and peering into microscopes. I was starting to lose hope when Zach called out, Maya, check this out. He was standing by a locked filing cabinet, holding a small key he'd found taped under Emerson's desk. With shaking hands, I took the key and turned it in the lock. Inside, we found a thick folder labeled Project Prometheus. As we flipped through the pages, our eyes widened in disbelief. Emerson had done it. He'd found a way to edit the human genome with unprecedented precision, potentially eliminating genetic diseases before birth. But that wasn't all. His notes hinted at the ability to enhance human capabilities, increase intelligence, strength, even lifespan. This is incredible, Zach breathed, but also terrifying. Imagine if this fell into the wrong hands. I nodded, a chill running down my spine. No wonder the university is freaking out. This could change the course of human evolution. As we delved deeper into the files, a sickening realization dawned on me. The last few pages were frantic, Emerson's usually neat handwriting growing erratic. He wrote about pressure from the university to suppress his findings, about shadowy figures following him, about fears for his safety. The final entry, dated the day before he vanished, simply read, They're coming. I have to protect the research. If anything happens to me, the truth must come out. Zach and I looked at each other, the gravity of what we'd discovered sinking in. Emerson hadn't taken a leave of absence. He'd been silenced. Just then, a noise in the hallway made us freeze. Footsteps, getting closer. We scrambled to replace the files and turn off the lights. Crouching behind a lab bench, we watched as a beam from a flashlight swept under the door. Security, a gruff voice called out. Anyone in there? We held our breath, hearts pounding. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away. We waited another 10 minutes before daring to move. As we snuck out of the building, clutching photocopies of the most damning documents, I knew our lives had changed irrevocably. We had stumbled upon a conspiracy that went beyond a missing professor, one that touched on the very future of humanity. "What do we do now?" Zach whispered as we hurried across the dark campus. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with the implications of what we'd learned. We find out what really happened to Professor Emerson, and we make sure his discovery doesn't get buried. In that moment, under the stars of a crisp autumn night, we made a pact. We would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. For Professor Emerson, for science, and for the future that hung in the balance. Little did we know, our investigation was about to plunge us into a world of danger, ethical dilemmas, and earth-shattering discoveries. The vanishing professor was just the beginning. The real test of our courage and convictions lay ahead, in the shadowy intersection of groundbreaking science and humanity's deepest fears. As we parted ways that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The campus, once so familiar and safe, now seemed full of hidden threats. But there was no turning back now. We had opened Pandora's box, and the only way out was through. The search for Professor Emerson and the truth behind his revolutionary discovery had begun. The sound of breaking glass shattered my world that night. In the moments that followed, I learned that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural beings, but the ones hiding in plain sight. I'm Olivia, a sophomore at Pinecrest University, and until that night, my biggest worry was passing my organic chemistry midterm. I'd been burning the midnight oil for weeks, practically living in the campus library. So when my roommate, Jess, announced she was heading home for the weekend to attend her sister's baby shower, I was secretly relieved. A whole weekend of uninterrupted study time in our off-campus apartment. Perfect. Friday night found me sprawled on the couch, textbooks and notes scattered around me like academic confetti. The only sounds were the scratching of my pen and the occasional rumble of my neglected stomach. I'd been so focused I'd forgotten to eat dinner. Glancing at the clock, I was shocked to see it was already past midnight. I stretched, my back popping in protest after hours hunched over my books. Maybe it was time for a snack break. As I padded to the kitchen, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. It was probably nothing, just the old building settling. But a prickle of unease crawled up my spine. I shook off the feeling, chiding myself for being paranoid. Too many late-night horror movie marathons with Jess clearly. I grabbed a granola bar from the cupboard and turned back to the living room. That's when I saw it. A shadow, just for a second, moving past the window. My breath caught in my throat. We lived on the second floor. There shouldn't be any shadows moving past our windows. I stood rooted to the spot, straining my ears. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, a soft scraping noise like metal on metal, coming from the direction of the front door. My mind raced. Phone. I needed my phone. It was on the coffee table, just a few feet away. If I could just reach it without making any noise. I took a tentative step forward, then another. The granola bar slipped from my suddenly sweaty palm, hitting the floor with a soft thud that sounded deafening in the silence. The scraping at the door stopped abruptly. I lunged for my phone, fingers trembling as I tried to unlock it. Just as I was about to dial 911, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of our front door opening. Panic surged through me. I looked around wildly for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My gaze landed on the heavy organic chemistry textbook. It would have to do. I grabbed the book and pressed myself against the wall next to the kitchen doorway, heart hammering so loudly I was sure the intruder would hear it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moved from the entryway into the living room. In the dim light from the street lamps outside, I caught a glimpse of a tall figure dressed in dark clothes. They moved with purpose, heading straight for Jess's bedroom. My mind whirled. This wasn't a random break-in. They knew the layout of our apartment. They knew which room was Jess's. Before I could process what that meant, the intruder emerged from Jess's room, frustration evident in their movements. They turned towards my room, and in that moment, I knew I had to act. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I stepped out from my hiding spot, textbook raised high. "Stop right there," I shouted, my voice sounding much braver than I felt. The intruder whirled around, clearly surprised. In the split second before they reacted, the light from the window illuminated their face. My blood ran cold as recognition dawned. It was Professor Reeves, my organic chemistry professor. The textbook slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. "Professor Reeves?" I gasped, disbelief coloring my voice. What are you doing here?" For a moment, he looked as shocked as I felt. Then his expression hardened, a coldness entering his eyes that I'd never seen before. "Olivia," he said, his usually jovial voice now low and menacing. "This is unfortunate. You weren't supposed to be here." I backed away slowly, my mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. "I don't understand. Why are you breaking into our apartment? What do you want?" He took a step towards me, and I noticed for the first time that he was wearing gloves. "Your roommate, Jessica. She has something that belongs to me. Something very important." A chill ran down my spine. Jess had mentioned she was having trouble in her organic chem class, that she was worried about failing. But this was insane. "Whatever it is, I'm sure we can sort it out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's no need for this." I gestured vaguely at the broken lock on our door. Professor Reeves laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Oh, Olivia, always trying to see the best in people. It's what makes you a good student. But this isn't something that can be sorted out. Your roommate stole something from me, something that could ruin my career, and I intend to get it back." My mind raced. What could Jess have possibly stolen that would drive a respected professor to break into a student's apartment in the middle of the night? And then it hit me, the midterm. Jess had been freaking out about it all week. The test answers. I breathed. She stole the test answers, didn't she? A flicker of surprise crossed Professor Reeves' face before he schooled his features back into a neutral mask. Clever girl. Yes, Jessica somehow got her hands on the answer key for Monday's midterm. But it's not just that. She's threatening to expose that I've been selling answers to students for years. The world tilted on its axis. Professor Reeves, selling test answers? It seemed impossible. He was one of the most respected professors in the department. But as I looked at the man standing before me, gloved hands clenched at his sides, I realized I didn't know him at all. "So what now?" I asked, trying to buy time as I inched towards my fallen phone. "You were just going to break in and, what, threaten Jess? Hurt her?" His eyes narrowed. "I was hoping to find the evidence and destroy it before anyone else found out. But now..." He took another step towards me. "Now! I'm afraid you've complicated things, Olivia." I made a break for my phone, but he was faster. His hand clamped around my wrist, yanking me away from the coffee table. I cried out in pain as he twisted my arm behind my back. "I'm sorry it's come to this," he said, his breath hot against my ear. "You were one of my best students. But I can't let this get out. I've worked too hard, for too long." Terror coursed through me as I realized the full gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about stolen test answers anymore. Professor Reeves was desperate cornered, and I was in his way. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I stomped hard on his instep, just like I'd learned in that self-defense class Jess had dragged me to last semester. His grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free. I ran for the door, but he recovered quickly, lunging after me. His fingers grazed my shirt as I ducked under his outstretched arm. I yanked open the door, ready to bolt down the hallway, only to collide with a solid mass on the other side. Strong hands steadied me, and I looked up into the concerned face of our neighbor, Mr. Grayson. Behind him stood two police officers, their hands on their holstered weapons. Olivia, are you all right? We heard shouting and breaking glass. Mr. Grayson's voice trailed off as he took in the scene behind me. The broken lock, the disarray in the apartment, and Professor Reeves standing frozen in the middle of the living room. What followed was a blur of questions, statements, and disbelief. Professor Reeves was arrested, his reputation in tatters. Jess returned early from her trip, shocked and guilt-ridden when she learned what had transpired. She admitted to finding the answer Key accidentally left behind after a study session in Reeves' office and discovering evidence of his long-running scheme to sell test answers to desperate students. In the days that followed, as the story exploded across campus and made headlines in the local news, I found myself grappling with a new reality. The safe, familiar world of academia I thought I knew had been shattered, revealing a darker underbelly of pressure, desperation, and corruption. But amidst the chaos and disillusionment, I also found strength I didn't know I possessed. I had faced my fears, stood up to authority, and survived. As I sat in the dean's office, recounting my story for what felt like the 100th time, I realized that the most important lesson I'd learned this semester hadn't come from any textbook. The world was not always what it seemed. People we admired could have hidden depths of darkness. But in facing these harsh truths, we could also discover our own capacity for courage and resilience. As I left the office, stepping out into the bright sunlight of the quad, I took a deep breath. The campus buzzed with activity. Students rushing to and from classes, their lives seemingly unchanged. But I knew better now. Behind every door, every friendly face, there could be secrets and struggles we never imagined. The night of the break-in had changed me, opened my eyes to the complexities of the world around me. And though the memories still sent a shiver down my spine, I walked forward with my head held high, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, I had stared down my own personal monster and lived to tell the tale.